This is Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? Courtney, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm so excited to have you. And fun little small world connection is the editor of your book, Jennifer Dukes Lee, is a good friend and past guest of this show. And so just anyone who loves Jennifer like I do, and then Jennifer loves, it's like we're automatically friends through that.
Good. I love her too. She's amazing.
She really is amazing. Well, first off, congratulations on the release of your book, Still Standing. I know, having just released a book myself, I know
Yeah.
what a massive undertaking this is. So congratulations. And like, how does it feel now that, like, when we're recording this and then when this airs, like, it's been out for a little bit. So like, do you feel like you're taking a breather yet, or are you still like right in the midst of it?
I think it's a mix. I think I'm a mix. I'm definitely on the backside where I'm exhaling, but it's also a little bit, like scary as you start to get the feedback, right? You start reading reviews or hearing people, and you're like, oh gosh, I did really do that. I really did tell that, out there.
Yes, exactly. Well, I would love for you to do what all my guests do, and that's give us the Courtney 101. So tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. Well, I began blogging in 2008 at womenlivingwell.org.
OG
Yes.
bloggers unite.
So it's been it'll be 16 years in August that I have been writing out online. And of course, when I began blogging, it was, just this small thing where I would write. I was a homeschool mom. And so I'd write about homeschooling and recipes and parenting and marriage. And I had graduated from the Moody Bible Institute, had a degree in Bible. So I also was writing devotionals. And I had married my high school sweetheart, and we were serving in our church. He was a deacon for 10 of those years. We were leading Bible studies together and serving, and so I was serving out online and writing. And then my first book came out back in 2012, titled Women Living Well, and everything just seemed to be going well. And then in 2015, after 19 years of marriage, I discovered that my husband was being unfaithful. And so at that time out online, I closed the window to my life. I was like, okay, I can no longer share like all the things about my parenting and my marriage and all the things I had been sharing on my blog, because now my children were getting a little bit older. They were going into junior high, and I was fighting for my marriage. And as a matter of fact, I was like, maybe I shouldn't even be here anymore. But I decided I would just do Bible studies. And so I began blogging through the Bible, chapter by chapter, one chapter a day. And we are 36 books of the Bible in now. So that is what I've been doing. I've been blogging through the Bible. And in the meantime, battling the darkness while living in God's light in my personal life. And so I felt like now, 10 years later, it was time for me to share the other side of the story of what's been happening in my personal life, with my readers and just with others who are battling the same things. And though it may not be that other people have gone through infidelity, we all are going through hard things. We're either going into a trial, coming out of one. The enemy is real. Spiritual warfare in our homes is real. And so I want to help women fight that darkness.
Oh, man. Well, there's so many pieces of this that I want to hit on. And I actually want to ask about maybe a more unique one first. And that is your decision to blog through the Bible, which I love so much. And I've actually thought about this, like, because I do the Bible recap, and
Yes.
I do a lot of like chronological Bible plans and things like that.
Yes.
And I've thought about, I'm like, what would it be like to do a Bible plan that's just a chapter a day? Like, how long would that take? And here you are, what, 9 years in?
Yes. 36 books of the Bible in. So we have
You're like
30
not
more.
even, yeah. So you're like a little over halfway through. And
This will be my life
okay.
work. And I didn't realize when I started it, but this will be my life work. I mean, when we finish, Then what? I don't know. People ask me. I'm like, well, then I'll just start over, I guess.
Okay. So I have to ask. So like where did the idea for this come from, and how did you decide how you were going to structure it? Because I mean, it is a massive undertaking, a massive
Right.
commitment.
Yeah. Well,
So talk about like the idea
previous
and yeah.
Yeah. So previously to, well, when I was blogging before, I had in my private life in 2007, before I ever started blogging, I was leading Bible studies in my church for years. And I started this thing called Good Morning Girls. And I had Good Morning Girls groups in my church where we were keeping each other accountable in our Bible reading. So in 2010, actually out on the blog, I talked about my Good Morning Girls groups. And some of the women who read my blog were like, I want to start a group. So I started a separate newsletter for women who wanted to start little groups in their church for accountability. And I began back in 2010 actually like doing online Bible studies, but they were often topical. They weren't necessarily taking you through a book of the Bible. So, and at times they took us through, like we did do a couple books of the Bible. But anyways, I started Bible reading plans then in 2010. So it was in 2015 then that I actually got serious about it. Like when because it was sort of like that was like a little side thing. And so then now this became like the forefront of what I was doing. So I always say Women Living Well, like if you were to read my header on my blog, it says Home of Good Morning Girls, because really it started with Good Morning Girls groups and accountability in our Bible reading time. And then it birthed into reading through the Bible at that time. So then we're just going literally Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and we're going back and forth between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So we've done Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd, Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and Chronicles, and on it goes. So we've been pretty much going back and forth between the two. I have jumped ahead a little. We've completed the book of Isaiah. I did an in-depth study on Ecclesiastes. So there were times where I jumped a little ahead or did like specialized studies, but overall, we're just working our way back and forth, tying it together because the Old Testament ties with the New Testament so beautifully.
So cool. So for those that are not familiar, explain like what is your format? Like how do you blog through? Obviously, like you read the chapter, but what sort of information are you including each day?
Right. So we read Monday through Fridays. We take Saturday and Sundays off for them to be able to catch up if they were to fall behind that week. So for each, if a book of the Bible has 20 chapters, it's a 4-week study. If it has 25, it's a 5-week study and so forth. So if it's a shorter book of the Bible, then I always make sure it takes 4 weeks. So like we've done Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and I make it so that they're smaller readings each day. And then I have a Good Morning Girls Facebook page with over 100,000 followers where every single day I post like the verse of the day and the reading. They can read it there. And then the women will comment and we use something called the SOAK method, which is you write down your scripture for the day, like the verse of the day. I pick that for them. Their observations, their applications. And if you've ever heard of SOAP, actually the P stands for prayer, but I changed it to SOAK with a K, and that means kneeling in prayer. So it's the same idea, but they would then write a prayer. And so really it's just about soaking God's word in like a sponge, taking it all in and then living that out, applying it. And not everything in the scripture is applicable when you're reading a historical book, but we always are learning about the character of God, the promises of God, the way he works with his people. So it's just taking that in and soaking it. So I do that. I give them the Bible reading plan. I give them a commentary, essentially like a synopsis each day describing like what is in that reading, a reflection question. They use the SOAK method. And then I do one video a week on Fridays that kind of like wraps it up, like a 10 to 12 minute video with some teaching in it for them.
So you mean to tell me there isn't always an application in like the book of Judges when, or
Leviticus? Leviticus,
like,
and it was all the offerings and the commands and all that. But we learn about our God, that he has a standard, or we learn about what Jesus did on the cross and what, like to understand the blood and the sacrifices. So yeah, no, there's not always like, it's not easy to find the reflection question every day, but we're doing it.
You mean King Eglon? We can't like take a whole lot away from King Eglon or,
right.
Okay. So yeah, I've done a chronological plan yearly for the last 6 years. And
Great.
I don't know why, it just really cracked me up. This is a complete digression and I don't care. But and,
Actually, it is what helps us, live in the light. But go ahead.
I know. I
Sorry.
love it so much. So we were in Leviticus, and it was like, it's my least favorite chapter of Leviticus when it's like talking about all the skin diseases, and it's like
Yeah.
really gross, and you're
Yeah.
reading about all these skin diseases. And it's like, if there's this and it's unclean, if it's this and there's unclean,
Right.
and blah, 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 unclean. And then it's like, if you see a man who has
Uh-oh.
lost his hair and he is bald,
You're
he is
pausing.
clean. He's just bald. And it just like, the verse literally is like, he's clean. He's just bald. And I just like that in the midst of all these like really disgusting things in Leviticus, it's just like, by the way, there are
Right.
bald men and they are not unclean.
That is funny.
Anyway.
Well, at their time, they didn't have the medical Google. They couldn't Google online, to find out medically what's going on. So, God told
Anyway, that was a complete digression, but it just, there's always things to make you laugh in the Bible as well.
This is
Okay.
true.
So, obviously this is a project that has been a big undertaking over the last 9 years. And it was also in the midst of one of your darkest seasons. And so, you alluded to it a little bit at the beginning. And that is your experience with infidelity and marital betrayal, and especially after, a 19-year marriage when, for all intents and purposes, from the outside, everything looks great and happy and, white picket fence and all of it. And, how difficult that is when it feels like everything has fallen apart. And I have quite a few friends right now who have been experiencing something like this in the last couple of years. Many married for 25, 30 years. And it's always jarring, obviously for the wife, but then it's also, for community and friends, just like the napalm on the lives of the people that are affected. And so I would love for you, because obviously this is a big part of your story, and this most recent book, Still Standing. And so I'd love for you to just kind of share a little bit more about what those initial days were like for you upon the revelation of the infidelity. And I ask that specifically kind of in a way for you to speak directly to the woman or man who is listening, who is either experiencing that currently or is kind of going through that. And then also the friends and support people. Because sometimes that can be, it can just almost feel impossible to know what to say to somebody who is experiencing that. So would you share that kind of with that person or persons in mind?
Right. Well, I think the very first emotion that I felt was shock. And it's part of the grief process, they say, shock and denial. And so I did not want to believe that the man that I loved and that I knew so well was even capable of this. And so I lived in denial of that at the start and as I've studied the grief cycle, I've learned that God uses this very first initial shock and denial to kind of protect us. Like emotionally, we probably couldn't handle the impact of reality if we didn't live in shock and denial at the start. So at the beginning, I was sort of just like, we're just going to cover this over. We don't need to tell a lot of people, like, he just made a terrible mistake and we're going to deal with this. We're going to go to counseling. We're going to get help. Like, we are going to put this back together. And when I would tell other people, they were like, you need to leave him right now. You need to end this. And they were giving me the advice that, because they loved me and they wanted to protect me, they were giving me advice that probably in the end was going to be what I needed. But in the moment, I just was taking in such a strong impact of pain and sorrow that I needed a minute to just pull it together and make it through just one day at a time, because the darkness is coming for you when you're going through this. And so I was crying. I was in shock. I was in denial. Then the the next part of the grief cycle is usually anger. And so then not necessarily I was angry with him, but I also got angry with other people in my life as they didn't understand. I felt like sometimes like what I was fighting for, I'm like, I love this man, but they were like, they're not the ones in love with him. And they're not the ones who lived for 19 years. And so they're like, file, protect yourself, do these things. And I'm like, but he's the father of my children. And I love being a wife and a mom. And now I'm going to it's scary. It's scary to have that empty space in the garage and that empty space at the table, and to go to the grocery store and all the groceries I used to have to buy for him. And suddenly I don't need to pick up his breakfast food and his dinner food and, and those things. And so, and all his clothes are hanging there. And so it literally is a form of grief that sometimes it's hard for people to see. If someone dies, I think people show up with casseroles, they show up with notes and hugs. But divorce is a little trickier. People are like a little skeptical, like, well, what was going on inside your home? What kind of wife were you being? What were you, what's he doing? Did you see this? Did you already know? Well, and so people kind of pull back rather than showing up. And then you have like the gossip circle. So all of that caused me, which I write about in the book, to sort of want to hide and go, and because there's some shame on you for not realizing he was cheating on you. Shame on you for taking him back over and over, so all of this is the enemy though, lying to us, lying to me, thinking that my worth is in being a wife, and as I got stronger and as I began into the healing process, and once I went through the grief cycle of bargaining, and then there's the deep sadness and for some depression, and there's this chaos, this swirling around you. Eventually that chaos settles down and you develop a new normal where it becomes normal to be single and to be a single mom. And in that new normal is acceptance. And then that's where the peace and the calm, and you feel the presence of God once again. But in the midst of it, it seemed like God was silent. It seemed like God was holding out on me, like he's answering other prayers and not mine. I mean, there's just so much chaos that truthfully what I needed was people to just show up and give me a hug, to show up and love me, to listen, to just be sympathetic and care and not judge, which was, I think, something that I think at times people wrestle with, because actually I think they're thinking they're helping oftentimes when they're giving advice. And sometimes it hurt because I didn't feel like they necessarily understood how badly I didn't want to be a single mom. I wanted to be married. I did not want to be going through this divorce.
You said something that I think is a really important piece of this that often I think maybe gets forgotten. And that was when you said that some of the initial reactions of people around you were essentially like, well, what was your home like? Was it essentially starting to put the blame almost on you? Yes. Rather than sitting with you in the grief of it and putting the blame where the blame needed to be. Right. But I also I think I understand while I don't agree with it, I think I understand the innate human response to that is like, oh, well, something had to have actually been wrong. Right. And so I'd actually love for you to share kind of in the 19 years prior to this revelation, one of the things you said was you were coming to grips with this was a complete shock to you. So can you give a little bit of a picture of what marriage and your family looked like prior to this all happening?
Right. So, well, we were high school sweethearts. We dated for 4 years. So that's one of the things where it's like, well, you think, well, gosh, if you marry quickly, maybe then you married someone without character but it's like we dated for 4 years. We knew each other very well. And then we were married for 5 years before we had our first children. So we had these wonderful 5 years of just the two of us bonding and doing life and traveling and doing all the, great things. And then we began to, I had my son, 2 years later, my daughter. And he was providing, he's a wonderful provider, wonderful protector. I mean, just didn't really have a lot of complaints about him. Of course, we had our moments, right? We had our fights, we had our disagreements and hard times. There's no marriage that's going to be 19 years long and you not have stuff in that sense, but nothing that seemed serious enough that you're like, ooh, like, are we going to make it? Like nothing like that. We were serving alongside each other. We had gone on a mission trip to Mexico together. We led Bible studies in our home for years. Like I said, he was a deacon and I was leading studies. So we were serving. Actually, we were very, very busy. That is one thing I can see is that I was homeschooling. I was leading my online blog. He was running his own business. He was serving at church. We had a lot going on, but specifically the piece of the puzzle that I know that carried the heaviest weight of the problem was he traveled for business. And that is where the infidelities took place. And so as he traveled, I was trying to be the supportive wife who's like, go get him. And of course I missed him. I wanted him home with me, but yet I was like, he has dreams and I want to be here to support them. But in the midst of that drive for success and, what he was doing, that is where, and so he had been traveling for 10 years. And so it was in that like 10th year that I discovered this. But yes, leading up to it, and one of the things I say too about people, I understand why they're skeptics. They're like, well, maybe she's a real ogre to live with, like we don't really know, like maybe she seems smiley and happy, but in real life, like what's she really like, and I understand that you could sit back and wonder whatever, but at the end of the day, I believe like character says that if you aren't happy in your marriage, you first would break it up and then you would go pursue someone else. Typically you wouldn't inside the marriage just step out. And so that is where, and then that would give me an opportunity. If there had been something that was really like I was doing that he was like really upset with, then I'd have the opportunity to change it and make it better. But thankfully for me, that wasn't really, he didn't like, on his way out, he didn't like rip me to pieces with all the terrible things that I was as a wife. As a matter of fact, that's why I write in the book, he came back many times and we continued to try to reconcile. And even after the divorce, we continued to try, but it just for years, we attempted, but he just continued to be unfaithful. And I came to the point where I wasn't able, like what people told me at the start was where I finally ended up. And I was like, no more, once you get help and you turn it around, I'm here. But I could love him unconditionally, but I no longer was able to trust him unconditionally. And it was the broken trust that we weren't able to rebuild.
Yeah. Well, that actually is the perfect segue to what leads me to my next question. And that is, you prayed for healing in your marriage for a really long time, but you didn't get the answer you were looking for. And that is such a common thing that I hear from so many people who are grieving or hurting in a variety of ways. Again, whether it's, marital struggles, maybe it's longing for a child or longing for a job or whatever, like life, or chronic illness, like there are these things, these trials, this period of suffering that we all face at some point. And sometimes when we can be incredibly fervent in prayer, and yet at the end of the day, like sometimes the answer is not going to be what we want. And that is so painful. And so
Yes.
when you look back and you realize that you'd been praying for something that you didn't get the answer that you want. And so in some ways it almost felt like God was silent or God was absent or God wasn't listening. Now that you have the benefit of hindsight, what did you learn from that? And what encouragement can you give to somebody else who maybe is facing or has faced the same thing?
Right. Well, one of the things I feel like I learned, one of the things that were going through my head is that, I felt like I'm following the Lord. I went to Bible school. I'm teaching the Bible online. I'm following God. And I'm being faithful to my husband. I love him. I try to follow all the things in all the Christian marriage books, build him up and, and support him and respect him and all these things. And so I learned that A plus B does not equal C. And beginning to realize that that my prayers were not going to be answered. When it came to that point, there was a little bit of a faith crisis. Not that I questioned that God was there. I've always, believed that, but that just like, it did feel a little bit like God was holding out on me, because I know this is where God shows up best. He transforms lives. He takes people, and when they turn their life around. And so I believed for that. And so when I came to that point, I was, you know, in every way, you're affected physically, you're not hungry, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. But if there's one thing I can say, it's this: our feelings are liars. And we cannot believe our feelings because God's word is true. And we stand on the promises of his word. And he says he is there. He says he is our refuge and strength. He says he is our shield. He is now my protector. No longer do I have my protector. He is my provider. No longer do I have my provider. And so when I stand on that truth, and like you said, what do I see now? When I look back, I see, yes, I prayed for reconciliation. I fasted and prayed for months and prayed for years, and I did not see that answer. But what I do know is that when I cried out for God on the bathroom floor, crying, God, just help me make it another day, I'm still here, right? I'm still standing. He did help me make it another day. When I said, God, give me the strength to do this with my children, to be a single mom, they are 19 and 21. I did it. Like God gave me this. I didn't do it. God did it through me. He gave me the strength. The things that I needed on the inside, like joy, peace, love, those things that you can't buy in a store, God gave me through his word, through his strength, through his presence. But the answers to my prayers on the outside for the comfort of having a husband and those things that I wanted, he didn't answer. I didn't get the answer he did answer. He said, no, I didn't get the answers I wanted. And so, and there's also this other fine line between also free will and that I'm praying for my husband's heart to change, but he also plays a role in that, of his heart. And then we also have the enemy. He hates our families. He hates our children. He hates our churches. He wants to break up every relationship we have, which is why I also talk about in the book about friendship wounds and church wounds, because divorce just ripple effect all the way through all these things. And if I want to let it just completely annihilate me, I can, or I can stand on God's word and keep following the principles of it day in and day out, because he speaks to all of it. He speaks to bitterness. He speaks to forgiveness. He speaks to love, loving our enemies, loving our neighbors. It's all love. That's our only option. He speaks to how to love him with our mind. As I renew my mind, all the lies of the enemy and of my feelings begin to be pushed out, and I put in the truth of his word every day that he is there. And so it really was a grappling with how to live in God's light, my subtitle, while wrestling in the dark. And so I've been through all those emotions, that we all humanly go through. But God's word is really what kept me standing and pulled me through.
Well, you've shared that, and obviously this all ties in, is, you guys had worked for years, multiple attempts at reconciliation, and obviously that isn't what happened. But you had begun to develop a lot of resentment and bitterness and anger as a completely understandable emotions and things that I think anybody would experience. But one of the really, really powerful stories you share in your book is about God freeing you from that. And so I ask you to share that because it was something that really encouraged me, because I think again, this speaks to any season of grief or hurt or pain or betrayal. And I'm really glad that you even mentioned like friendship breakups, friendship losses, church hurt.
Yeah.
Because goodness, so many of us have experienced those things, and resentment and bitter and angerness and unforgiveness, like those are cancers in our heart. They just create hard hearts that do not look like Jesus. And yet it is so, so hard. And so would you share that story that you share in this book? Because it's really, really powerful. And it was such an encouragement to me. Right. And so I know it's going to be an encouragement to somebody else.
Well, I know that when we're feeling the emotion of anger, that in a sense, I felt like a misplaced anger. I didn't know where to put it. I'm like, I know I'm not supposed to be angry at God, but I'm angry. And I know I don't want to be angry at my ex-husband because I want to reconcile. And I'm angry at I don't want to be angry at my church. Like I didn't know who to be angry at. And so essentially it was almost like I was angry at the world because none of it was working out. It felt like nobody understood, one of those things. And so I had gone to a counseling session. And as I came out of that, I got in the car and I began to just drive on a backcountry road, like one town over. And I drove and I drove and I drove and I cried. I banged on the steering wheel. I've cried the hardest I've ever cried in my life, until I couldn't see anymore. I had to pull over and get it together. But it was at that point, at my lowest of my lowest low, that I got basically sick and tired of myself. I was sick and tired of being mad, sick and tired of being bitter, sick and tired of doubting God. I wanted to be done. I wanted to be free. And so it was at that point of true surrender, because I had surrendered many times in my life, when I went to Bible school, or when I, went online and different things. But it was here where I was like, I am surrendering my entire story, everything. This is not what I want. I do not want to wear the Scarlet D. I do not want to be a single mom. Everything that my life is turning out to be is not where I want to be. How do I even do ministry? Who wants to follow a Bible study leader who's divorced? Like, I was like, not sure I could even continue on. And so all that uncertainty, but it was at that point, at the lowest of low, where I just was done with it, sick of myself, sick of all of this, surrender it to him. And I just feel like when I did fully cry out to God and surrender it, is when all that peace then of God, like he was present. He was there with me. He says he is near to the brokenhearted, and he showed up not in an audible way or anything like that, but it's just the peace of him came over me, and I dried up my tears. I began to drive home just quietly. I turned off my music, and it was this very serious moment for me as I drove home. And it was at that point that I was like, okay, if I can't change him, I'm going to start changing myself. I'm not going to live my life stuck. I am going to move forward, and I'm going to do the best I can, be the best single mom I can be the best friend I can be the things that God has called me to be. I'm going to leave it all in the hands of the Lord and let it go and seek healing, so that I can have victory over all the lies of the enemy, that he was just taking me into the darkness, and it kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. And it felt like every time I tried to break free, the darkness was coming for me still. I tell a story in the book about taking my kids for the first time on vacation without him. We went to Myrtle Beach. It's a 12-hour drive here from Ohio. And so I'm like, we got to get away from here, right? So I think I'm running away from all my problems by taking them to the beach. And we get there, and the very first night, we're sitting out on the balcony, and I'm with my son, and he begins to cry. Sorry. And I do too. And I'm like, shoot, the darkness is coming for us. They followed us all the way here, and we can't break free of this. And once again, this is where I'm saying that you don't always break free in an instant, in one drive. But here again, I had to make the decision. No, we will not live with the enemy just destroying everything. Jesus said he came to give us the abundant life. And that is a life of joy and love and peace. And so we're going to do that. I'm going to love my kids. We're going to have fun. We are going to go throw the football on the beach. We're going to swim in that ocean. We're going to go out to dinner, and we are going to choose joy. And I got to, as a mom, set that example so they can have fun too. And so it was just over and over, as I felt like the enemy was chasing me, in a sense, like that darkness just keeps coming for all of us, because he doesn't care if he knocks us down. He's going to kick us while we're down too. It's not like, oh, wow, I've had enough. Now it's all going to be fine. No, it's like the toilet breaks, the sink breaks, the dishwasher, everything, the car breaks all at the same time. And you think you've had enough. And sometimes it just keeps coming. So it's not like a one-time decision where you can say, well, now I'm free. No, it's an over and over surrender of, okay, I sense he's coming for me, and I'm not doing this again. I'm not going to end up just lying on the floor crying. I'm going to get out of bed, and I'm going to choose joy today. His mercies are new every day. And today I'm going to just for today, I'm going to walk in his truth and in his strength and give it to him. And so it was this over and over, as I had to break free from this, to where it became a repetition of doing this, to where now I feel like I walk in freedom, and it's just a scar rather than a cut, that when you touch a cut or a wound, it hurts when you touch it. But now it's a scar. I can see that I was hurt, but when I touch it and talk about it, it doesn't hurt as bad. It's because it's a scar. You don't feel the pain.
You really, like, you rejected being a victim. You rejected staying in that place of woe is me, everything is terrible.
Right.
And getting out of that and finding that peace that surpasses all understanding, finding that joy of the Lord, finding that victory and confidence in Jesus. But that is such a hard place, and for a lot of people, it's understanding that peace takes time. But more often than not, we want the quick fix. We want the the easy button. We want the Staples easy button in all of this. And that is just
Right?
not often that
It's
can't
not.
happen. Um,
No.
and so I'd love for you to just share maybe a small step of encouragement to somebody who is feeling that bit of stuck, or maybe feeling like a victim, or maybe feeling like they can't, find victory, like they can't feel joy again, like they can't feel peace, because they're in that cycle right now of not being able to let go. And
Right.
sometimes that the hardest step is always the first one. And so I wasn't sure if you had maybe just some, like something practical, or something that that people who are really struggling with that could do to get out of that cycle.
Yes. Well, change only comes when we decide we're going to change. And so the question is, are you sick and tired of where you're at today? And are you ready for that change? Because you have to get to the point where you're ready for change and you're going to implement it. And I'm going to give the most basic implementation, but it is the most powerful that I know. And that is to read the book of Psalms. When you start in
Mhm.
chapter 1, and you just go to chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4, David has felt every emotion known to humankind. He is joyful and he is sad. He is scared and he is mad. And he is in all the emotions that we feel. He has already expressed. It is the longest book of the Bible, 150 chapters. And so it gives us the freedom to feel like you're like, oh, he gets me, like he understands me, like, and he wrote this so long ago, and yet it is so relevant today. And so I would encourage you to read the book of Psalms and then pick out the Psalms that speak most to you. For example, Psalm 46 was one for me. I hung it on my fridge. I read it out loud to my children in the car before school. I memorized it. And really put it in your heart and renew your mind. That is what the word says, that we are to meditate on his word and let it change our mind. How does change come? We have to change our mind and how we're thinking and how we're seeing things. And when we have God's perspective on things, it changes our outlook. And because everything can still be a total train wreck in our lives and a mess. And we see other people who maybe are going through something really hard. And we're like, how are they doing that with joy and such grace? And it's like, it's God. It is just God. But he gives us that strength. But his word, we need to renew our minds. We need to meditate on his word. We need to soak it in and then live it out. Put feet to what we see him teaching us there. Other things, I have rhythms in my home. Every fall, I've been doing this out online. I do something called Making Your Home a Haven. And every week I challenge the women, as we're doing a Bible study, to also do something relevant in their homes. And I do this every day in my home. And that is, I light a candle every morning in my kitchen. But if you work maybe outside the home, you can do it at night. And I give thanks for one thing. And because gratitude pushes out the darkness too. And so as we look at the things God has done, and so every day I light a candle in my home. I got 4 candles for Mother's Day from my kids this year, because they know I go through them like crazy. They know what
Yes.
mama wants. Okay. And so anyways, I light a candle every day in my home. I give thanks, and I let the flicker of that candle be a reminder to me that of God's faithfulness, and that he has given me so many good things I never prayed for and asked for. He has given me. And then, yes, things I prayed for and asked for, he hasn't given me, but I try to focus on the good things he has done.
So good. So good, Courtney. Okay. Well, in the last few moments that we have together, obviously, this is my encouragement personally for everybody to go pick up Courtney's book, Still Standing: How to Live in God's Light While Wrestling with the Dark. Such a powerful book, especially for anybody who, kind of like you said at the beginning, is coming out of a season of suffering and pain, going into a season, or right in the midst, whatever it looks like we're all going to experience it. And so my last question for you is, what does it look like for you today to still be standing? And what does life look like for Courtney now, after going through this?
Well, most people know me out online as Courtney Joseph, but on the cover of the book, you will see a new last name, and it's Courtney Joseph Fallick. I actually legally dropped my middle name, Nicole, and put Joseph as my middle name. So that is my middle name now. And my last name is Fallick because After 8 years of singleness, there was a man in our church whose wife had passed away.
Mm.
And he asked me out while my kids were a junior and senior in high school. And I said, no, like I said, yes, I went on the date, but then he was interested in like being seriously dating. And I was like, no, I have 2 kids and I need to finish raising them. I want to do this well before I don't want to mess with their high school years of my love life and stuff. And so he was like, so I was like, you can go date other people. And he was like, no, I will keep pursuing you. So he kept calling. He kept taking me out.
Wow.
Everyone loved him. So long story short, after 2 years of dating, we were married this past July. So we're coming up on our 1 year anniversary. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And so in that process, he has 2 girls in their 20s. So we are now blending. So I have new life experiences as I'm remarried. And yeah, so we're in a new home and my kids. And so there's a lot of heavy though in that, as both of
Yeah.
all the children have gone through a lot. They've been through a lot of grief, a lot of hard things. They didn't ask for this. This is the hand they were dealt to. And then he had to sell his home where he raised his children. I had to sell my home where I raised my children. And as we put those for sale signs and we emptied out those homes, there was grief. And I talked about this a little bit out online, but as you know, we closed that door and I drove away for the last time. I know it's sad anyways to close doors on homes and move when you've had memories there, but there was just this extra, like, actually just, I wish I could have gone and just gotten on my knees in that yard and thanked God for the faithfulness, the way he protected us in that home during those 8 years of being a
Mm.
single mom. He was so faithful. And I'm just so grateful that I made it through. And I'm on the other side. And yes, we're in a new home and there's so much joy in just being remarried, and that God did have a future plan for me that I could not have seen at that time in this wonderful man. But it's not easy. I mean, there's new things with the children as we're all moving forward and experiencing something new, but God is
Mm.
good and he is
Wow.
faithful.
What an encouragement, Courtney. Thank you so much for being here. And for the listeners, I will have all of Courtney's links in the show notes for Women Living Well. She is on Instagram at Women Living Well, and go pick up your copy of Still Standing today. It's available wherever books are sold. Courtney, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.